the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown, publicly and unreservedly apologized to the Rastafarian community in Antigua and Barbuda, who were marginalized as social outcasts and actively discriminated against for decades. In the eyes of the colonial power that ruled our country for 3 centuries, the sins of the Rastafari were twofold. First, their complete rejection of a British imperial culture that enslaved people of African descent and amputated their connection to their ancestral homeland in Africa. And second, their determination to shape an identity that refused to succumb to the desecration of their culture and their religious beliefs. For these transgressions, they were marginalized and alienated for almost 100 years throughout the Caribbean. It is a tribute to their endurance and their innate capacity that the Rastafarian community throughout the region, and now increasingly in many parts of the world, have produced professionals in medicine, in science, in the halls of academia, and in the performing arts. In the words expressed in song by the most internationally known Rasta, the iconic Bob Marley, "We refuse to be what you wanted us to be. We are what we were, and that's the way it's going to be." Out of a dark colonial past of their forebears, Rastas have risen up to affirm their self-dignity, their African heritage, and their worth as human beings. They have shown that from the margins of society can come energy and creativity that can spread around the world and captivate it. Prime Minister Gaston Brown said the following in his public apology, and I will read what he said. "Many of our ancestors were defiant until death, tortured, broken on the wheel, and beaten to death. Others succumbed to the lash of the whip, to the daily grinding down by the exploiter's boot, to the respite that was offered by acceptance of the oppressor's rule. You, the Rastafari, remain defiant in defense of your culture and human dignity. So you had to be marginalized, scorned, victimized, and labeled. But you endured, living in your own community, growing your locks, and retaining your own religious connections. Cannabis for you was not a mind-numbing drug that disembodied your spirit from the Babylon in which you endured. It was a vehicle for religious communion with Zion, the place where black people lived with dignity, in freedom, and connected to their being. Regrettably, even as the colonial establishment retreated from whence they came, and people born in Caribbean countries replaced them in authority, the Rastafari continued to be marginalized. There were times in Antigua and Barbuda when our own misunderstanding of Rastafari and its religious rituals, such as the use of cannabis, caused our establishment to turn away Rastas at the airport and to demand that their children cut away their locks as a condition of entering school. Even our churches scorned the Rastafari. That discrimination went on for decades, preventing the Rastafarian community from escaping the confines of poverty and denying them the right to explain who they are, what they believe, and what part they wish to play in the homelands that are now our collective heritage. It is long past time for discrimination, marginalization, and rejection of the Rastafarian community to end. In the full knowledge of all that I have described here, my government pledges recognition of the Rastafarian community and equality as an integral part of our community. And just as we accord the right of others to practice their religion, including their religious rights within their churches, so too do we accept the rights of the Rastafari to practice their liberty, their cultural and religious practices, including their sacramental use of cannabis. For all the harm that has been done to the Rastafari over the decades in Antigua and Barbuda, I apologize most sincerely on behalf of my government and the government that went before us. That was the Prime Minister's public apology. Mr. President, the Prime Minister and government of Antigua and Barbuda have already taken steps to recognize the dignity and worth of the Rastafarian community as an integral part of our society. Members of the Rastafari have long served as teachers in our schools and as key members of our farming community. Now they serve as senators in our parliament and in our diplomatic service, including with the rank of ambassador. Mr. President, the actions of the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda gives meaning and substance to the Inter-American Democratic Charter, which in its proper application underscores the important values for which we stand as a community of nations in the Americas. The measures that have been taken are consistent with Article 9 of the Charter, which commits us all to the elimination of all forms of discrimination, especially gender, ethnic and racial discrimination, as well as diverse forms of intolerance, the promotion and protection of human rights of indigenous peoples and migrants, and respect for ethnic, cultural, and religious diversity in the Americas, contributing to strengthening democracy and to citizen participation. Mr. President, members of this Council, Antigua and Barbuda is proud of this historic action. I am pleased to have with me today a Rastafarian member of our diplomatic corps, Ambassador Franklin Francis, Ras Frankai Tafari, to identify him properly. He is also a leading representative of the Rastafari throughout the Caribbean, having received the highest honors of the community. And with your permission, Mr. President, I would like to ask Ambassador Frankai Tafari to address this Council, and by doing so, to create history. He will be the first member of the Rastafari community to speak to such a high-level representative body of the nations of the Americas. And if I may, I will invite him to speak. Thank you.
Adelante, por favor.
Please do.
Franklin Francis.
Good morning to the distinguished delegates, and greetings in the name of Haile Selassie I, acknowledged as the divine inspiration of the Rastafari nation. I convey the thanks and appreciation of the Rastafari nation for the historic opportunity to address this august hemispheric body, the Organization of American States, on such an important issue as human rights and justice, which we believe should be of concern to the nations and peoples of the world. The Rastafari nation commends and thanks the government of Antigua and Barbuda and the Honorable Prime Minister Gaston Brown for his unique, sincere and heartfelt apology to Rastafari for repair and redress for the atrocities inflicted on Rastafari for their acknowledged utilization of cannabis and their strong stance in defense of the oppressed and downtrodden minorities in our hemisphere and indeed in the world. This apology comes on the heels of previous token allowances to the Rastafari community, including the admission of dreadlocks youth into the educational institutions in Antigua and Barbuda, and the cessation of the trimming of the dreadlocks covenant of incarcerated Rastafari brethren and sistren. The Rastafari nation has long expressed our advocacy for the rights of Africans the world over, and our advocacy for the use of cannabis as a human rights issue, and view the prohibition of cannabis and the persecution of Africans through the immoral crime against humanity that was chattel slavery as contrary to United Nations Declaration on Human Rights as enshrined in the United Nations Charter and other conventions, including those in the OAS. The apology and declared intention for repair and redress is thus seen in the context of the call for reparatory justice for slavery and colonial oppression, expressed by the establishment of the CARICOM Reparations Commission and voiced by other Africans in the diaspora and on the continent. This call gains added significance, coming as it does in the United Nations declared International Decade for People of African Descent, 2015 to 2024. We express the hope that the call for reparations will see a recognition of Rastafari sacramental use of the herb cannabis and involvement and inclusion in the material benefits to be derived from proper utilization of cannabis. Further, that repair and redress will involve assistance to the formerly disadvantaged Rastafari and African communities, and for the Rastafari inclusion in the civil society, community, and societal deliberations on developmental and other issues of concern to all oppressed peoples. Noting that Rastafari and African peoples are situated throughout the nations of the Americas, it is our hope and fervent prayer that the call for reparatory justice will be heeded not only by other Caribbean leaders, but by other hemispheric leaders and the entire international community. To the distinguished delegates of the 34 nations of the Americas represented here, I give my heartfelt thanks for the honor of addressing you. Thank you, sir.